I'm reading from Acts 9, 36 through 43. Now in Joppa there was a disciple whose name was Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. She was devoted to good works and acts of charity. At that time she became ill and died. When they had washed her, they laid her in a room upstairs. Since Lydia was near Joppa, the disciples, who heard that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him with the request, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter got up and went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the room upstairs. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was with them. Peter put all of them outside, and then he knelt down and prayed. He turned to the body and said, "Tabitha, get up." And she opened her eyes, and seeing Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he showed her to be alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. Meanwhile, he stayed in Joppa for some time with a certain Simon, a tanner.
Our new sermon series, At the End of the Day, is an invitation to pause at the end of each day and reflect on the events and experiences and emotions of the day that we just lived through. To simply take time to review the tapes, if you will, the tapes of the day, and to ask ourselves, how did God show up in my life today, especially in the veiled, ordinary, seemingly unspectacular moments of my day? How did I show up to the world today? Did I see clearly, listen deeply, speak truthfully, act justly, live authentically? Did I seize the day or squander it, hit the mark or miss it, pursue God's call or resist it? Do I need to make amends or a correct course as I prepare for a new day? Reflecting on our day is what the psalmist had in mind when he prayed, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." And to number our days is not merely to count the quantity of them, but to reflect on the quality of them. Because a good life is measured not by the length of its years, but by the span of our souls, which grows wider only in proportion to the daily care and attention we give them. The writer Annie Dillard says, "How we spend our days is how we spend our lives." A single day can tell us all we need to know about who we are and how we are and what we are giving our lives to. So at the end of each day, it is wise to pause and ask ourselves, did I spend it well this day, this life? Those in Alcoholics Anonymous know the value and necessity of self-examination when they arrive at the 10th step, which says, "Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it." Reviewing the tapes is part of our universal journey toward self-awareness and transformation. But reflecting on the totality of even a single day of our life can be overwhelming. So much transpires in just one day of our lives. Where do we even start? It helps to have a defining question sometimes to focus and guide us as we review our tapes at the end of the day. So of the 7 questions we're exploring in this series, let's turn now to our second question, which is, have the ears of my heart opened to the needs of others today? I recently saw a woman wearing a t-shirt that read, "Sure, let me drop everything and work on your problem." And that t-shirt is a cynical reminder that we are all bombarded almost daily with the urgent requests of others, each demanding that we drop everything and attend to whatever need they have deemed all important and pressing. Of course, sometimes those needs really are urgent and they're worthy of our immediate attention, but there are other times when we might expect or suspect that they can wait, or that they're simply not our problem to solve. It can often be hard to know the difference. Torn between feelings of empathy and cynicism, we might truly desire to act compassionately, but we also may fear we could be getting played here. The French philosopher Simone Weil once said, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." Think of experiences in your life when, in a moment of real need, you felt truly heard and seen by someone. They believed that a generous person is one who pays full attention to others. She said that this act of paying attention requires a conscious effort to turn away from oneself and toward the other, acknowledging their inherent value and needs. But this will always come at some cost to us. In fact, Vey herself died of malnutrition at the age of 34 after giving away her food rations to starving war victims in England as a sign and act of solidarity. Prioritizing the value and needs of others over everything else, including ourselves, often does come at a real cost. So how do we keep the ears of our hearts open to the needs of others without getting weighed down by the sheer volume and magnitude of them? How do we not miss those moments in our day when real human need is standing right in front of us and we are called by God to help in some way? Our story from the book of Acts gives us some important clues. In this story, word is spreading that Peter has just healed a paralyzed man in Lydda when he receives a text message from someone over in Joppa about a woman named Tabitha who has died unexpectedly. The entire village of Joppa is grieving because Tabitha, we are told, was not only a disciple of Jesus, but she had been admired for her devotion to good works and acts of charity toward the poor. Her death is a major loss to her community. So her friends message Peter, asking him to drop everything he's doing in Lydda and come quickly to Joppa. Their text message says simply, "Please come to us without delay." This request comes at a time when Peter is surely already running and fast forward. His life is probably one urgent matter after another. He's leading this new Jesus movement, preaching and teaching, healing, solving conflicts, bringing entire villages apparently to the faith all at once. The growth of this new movement is explosive. Every moment of his day is packed with needy people making all kinds of urgent requests. His life is one interruption after another. Everything is urgent and important, and Peter is pulled in every direction. And then another pressing demand, this one from the village of Lydda. "Please come to us without delay." Have you ever had one of those days when you make a list of all the things you must get done only to see it all derailed by one unplanned request after another, so that by the end of the day you wonder if you've accomplished anything you originally set out to do? In our bottom line culture, a culture that values results and measurable outcomes and a return on investment, interruptions are an inconvenience to be avoided. But here we are reminded that they are also where the divine is hidden. God always comes to us disguised as an interruption to our lives. John Maxwell once told a story about a member of his staff who was highly organized and driven and goal-oriented. Maxwell said he was so organized that if he happened to drop his briefcase on the ground, all the contents would surely fall out in alphabetical order. But his driven nature became his greatest weakness. One morning, Maxwell was standing in the office talking with a group of people when this staff member came in from the parking lot and walked right through the group. Without saying a word, he strode down the hall directly to his office. Maxwell excused himself from the group and followed him. And he stood in the door of his office and he said, "Dan, what are you doing? You walked right by us. You didn't say anything." And Dan said, "Well, I have a lot of work to do." And Maxwell looked at him and said, "Dan, you just passed your work." If you suspected that God always comes to us disguised as an interruption to our life, would it change the course of your day? In the story, Peter embraces the interruption. A woman has died. People are grieving and in pain. So he drops everything. He doesn't even know what their request means or what he's even getting himself into. Peter has never raised a dead person back to life, but still his answer is yes. A wise teacher once said, "The answer is compassion." Now, what's the question? When Peter arrives, they take him upstairs to where Tabitha is lying. Everyone is in shock and weeping and grieving. And here's where Peter does 4 things that speak clearly of how the ears of his heart were opened to the needs of others that day. Pay close attention to what he does in this story. First, he sends everyone out of the room. Peter is here not to perform for the crowd. He's not here to impress his adoring audience. He's not here to flex his spiritual muscles and play the role of a Christian superhero. By sending everyone out of the room, he reminds us that we are only able to genuinely respond to the needs of others when we are completely unself-conscious about our actions, self-forgetting and unconstrained by self-interest and motive, preoccupation and guile, completely available to God and to the one in need. It was Os Guinness who said, "We who live before the audience of one can say to the world, 'I have only one audience. Before you, I have nothing to prove, nothing to gain, nothing to lose.'" In that room, it's just Peter and God and a dead woman named Tabitha who, in her current state, has no opinion about what Peter should do or must do next. At the end of our day, we might ask ourselves, did I live and act before the only worthy audience of my life? What Peter does next is also instructive. He kneels beside Tabitha. He kneels to pray, of course, but he also kneels to bring himself to the level of the vulnerable human being whose desperate need is right before him. Peter has not come here to be a savior. To him, Tabitha is not an object to be worked on or fixed, but a subject to be cherished and loved. This encounter will not be a transaction of compassion or a drive-by display of charity. Peter sees beyond the woman's condition to acknowledge the real person. It's a reminder that our job is never to fix people or to rescue them or to save them. Our job is to see people, to listen to people, to accompany people in their need. This is the very meaning of compassion, a word that comes from the Latin compati, which means to suffer with. And notice how close the word compassion is to the word companion, which comes from compani, meaning to share our bread with. True compassion is companionship. It's kinship. It's like sharing our bread with the suffering. Compassion always turns objects into subjects, strangers into friends. Peter reminds us here that whenever we kneel before others, there is community and kinship, which is always the foundation of our healing and wholeness. At the end of our day, we might ask ourselves, did I kneel before others today? That is, did I share my bread and suffer with others? And then what Peter does next, he speaks to the woman. The moment of her awakening happens precisely when he says to her, Tabitha, wake up. But it's not the command to wake up that Peter brings the woman back to her world with. It's the speaking of her name. She's not some anonymous face or just another nameless request to Peter. She is someone. She is known. She has a name, Tabitha. And did you know that her name means something profound here? Tabitha in the Aramaic means gracious or good. This is who she was and what she had always embodied in her acts of charity toward the poor. She was gracious and good. Peter, in speaking her name out loud, reminds her of her inherent goodness. Father Greg Boyle has given his life's work to helping gang members heal their trauma and to rehabilitate their lives. He says that nearly every gang member suffered terrible abuse as a child, victims of neglect and cruelty, childhood violence. And he says that integral to their healing and rehabilitation is this persistent reminder that they are, as he says, unshakably good. This is when they begin to wake up, when they hear that despite the trauma they've endured and the trauma they've caused, they are unshakably good. Boyle says, resilience arrives in the moment you discover your own unshakable goodness. Tabitha, says Peter, wake up. At the end of our day, we might ask, did I see and affirm the unshakable goodness of others? And finally, when Tabitha does wake up, Peter gives her his hand. This is the moment of deep human connection, when she is finally returned to her world and to her community. Peter has witnessed the power of human touch before in his life. When he saw Jesus touch the leper, when he saw Jesus put his fingers over the eyes of the blind, when he saw Jesus lay his hands on Jairus' daughter and bring her back to life, when he saw Jesus hold an epileptic boy until his seizures passed. There can be no healing, there can be no expression of compassion without some tangible connection like human touch. Touch shatters our cultural illusion of separateness. It bridges the anonymity of distance and places us within the other and the other in the same circle of belonging. Touch erases otherness and separation and distance and difference. The late John O'Donohue says, human beings share such tenderness and fragility because we live not within shells, but within skin, which is always sensitive to the force and touch and presence of the world. At the end of the day, we might ask ourselves, did I come out of my shell to draw others out of theirs? Years ago, I read an op-ed piece in the Los Angeles Times. It's written by a man named Rick King, a low-budget movie director who, at that time, was in the depths of despair over a career that was going nowhere. And one afternoon, He took his 8-year-old twins to the Santa Monica Pier with a friend to take a little walk along the beach, and he was interrupted by the garbled voice of a man with a twisted face sitting in a wheelchair. The man was speaking to him, but King couldn't understand what he was saying. Finally, he made out his request. "Can you help me?" asked the man. King thought to himself, does it ever end? Can you live in Santa Monica and not be approached for just one day? He was put off by this man's slurred speech and facial contortions. He was ready to dig into his pocket for some spare change. And he said, what do you need? But the man in the wheelchair said, "Could you help me go to the bathroom?" King said, what do you need? "Could you help me go to the bathroom?" asked the man. King figured he just needed some help getting in the door. And as they headed toward the bathroom, they started chatting. The man's name was Neil. He had cerebral palsy. When they got to the door, King offered to help him maneuver through, but that wasn't the help Neil needed. Neil insisted that King go in first. And King said the process was intimate. It involved holding a plastic cup. "It'll take a couple of minutes," Neil informed King. "So," said King, "while I held the cup, we talked. And after a couple of minutes," he said, "we went back out into the brilliant sunshine. We said goodbye, and I watched the wheelchair disappear into the crowd." One of King's sons said to him, "Dad, that was a very nice thing for you to do." But King said, "In my mind, I was thinking it was a very nice thing of Neil to let me help him." Have the ears of my heart opened to the needs of others today? As you review your tapes, ask yourself, did I live before the audience of one? Did I lower myself to see the other face to face? Did I affirm the unshakable goodness of the other? And did I erase separateness and otherness altogether?